Prologue. Patterns in the shadows. I wasn't looking for her. In fact, I wasn't looking for anything at all that day. My mind was busy with ordinary thoughts, the kind of thoughts that fill the space between waking and sleeping, the kind of thoughts that leave no room for miracles. Yet miracles have a way of arriving unannounced, and that is when I first sensed her. It wasn't a special kind of day, no parties, no celebrations. It was just an ordinary day in an ordinary life. The air around me shifted though, subtle at first, like the change in pressure before a storm. My skin tingled, and though I was alone, I felt watched. Not in an uneasy way that sends a shiver down your spine, but in a way that brings both stillness and certainty. It was as if a veil had lifted, and just for a moment I was standing at the edge of two worlds. And then I saw her, my breath caught, not in fear, but in recognition. Deep inside me, I knew this was not a dream, nor a trick of the mind. This was a guardian, my guardian. I would come to see her again, and each time would mark me in ways I could never forget. She was not only watching me, she was guiding me. She was part of a chain, or what I now believe to be an intricate web of threads. And so was I. What I did not know then was that my life was being shaped, piece by piece, step by step, for a task larger than myself. I have lived a life that at times should have ended. I have walked away from loss, illness, and even death. Yet each time, something or someone seemed to intervene. Some call it chance, some call it fate. I know it as my guardian angel. She has appeared 4 times in my life, maybe more unseen. On 1 occasion she was seen by my mother, and on 3 occasions she has come directly to me. Each time her presence arrived at a moment of crisis, as if to remind me that she was still there, and that my story was not yet finished. At first I doubted. I laughed off my mother's insistence that she saw an angel standing behind me. I dismissed my own experiences as tricks of the mind or the imagination of a man desperate for comfort. But the years and the patterns I have seen now have taught me otherwise. I believe my life has been guided, not just saved, but directed to people and places that I was meant to find. Now, looking back, I believe that we are all part of a chain, a web of events, woven together by unseen hands. My task may only be a small part of the larger design, but it is my task, my path, from which I seem unable to deviate. This book is not a sermon nor a set of answers. It is simply my story, a chronicle of survival, guidance, and the search for meaning along the way. In reflecting on this, I invite you as the reader to reflect on your own journey. Have there been moments in your life when you were spared, redirected, or placed somewhere that you were needed to be? Perhaps, like me, you have been walking with an angel, even if you were oblivious to the presence. My guardian angel came to me in whispers, light, and shadows, and the only way to recognize the patterns in the shadows or the complex web of threads that we all walk is to start at the very beginning, to begin on the day that she first redirected me and helped me to ultimately understand that the road I wanted to travel was not the path that I was meant to walk. Chapter 1. The Early Web. I often look back on my childhood and see nothing remarkable. School was good and I loved going, mostly because of the friends I had. I was one of those unusual children who begged to attend even when ill, pleading not to be left behind in bed. Lessons were fine, but it was the friendships that drew me in. I was a social creature, happiest when surrounded by others. Academically, I did enough to meet the expectations of parents and teachers. 8 O-levels and 3 A-levels. I took 9 O-levels just to be different. By then I had developed a competitive streak, a need to prove myself in small ways. Sport became another outlet. Football, cricket, tennis. I wasn't especially gifted, yet my headmaster noticed that things, whether in the classroom or on the field, seemed to come naturally to me. I was also beginning to develop a restless mind. Critical thinking arrived easily, and with it the urge to question everything. I wouldn't stop until the answers made sense to me, which put me at odds with my father. Our relationship was strained even as a child, and grew more so as I got older. He was never satisfied with the choices I made. They didn't make sense to him, and he could not respect that they made sense to me. We were simply too different. Still on the surface, I followed the traditional path, the one that could have led to being a doctor, a vet, or perhaps even a cricketer of some standing. Life in my early teens seemed normal enough, no different to anyone else's. Nothing then suggested that my life would soon take turns that no one could have anticipated. And yet even then, unseen threads were already being woven, threads I would only come to recognize much later. Wani. My father served in the Navy, and when I was 9 years old, our family left the UK for Malaysia and later Singapore. At the time, I was too young to understand the full weight of the experience, but these 3 years quietly reshaped me. Malaysia and Singapore were not as they are today. There were no gleaming high-rises or modern infrastructures. My memories are of houses balanced on stilts, endless stretches of sand, and muddy canals, one affectionately named the Sweet-Smelling Canal. But aside from the landscape, it was the life itself, the vibrant colours, the heavy heat, the slower rhythm of the days, the deep culture and history, and above all, the people, that etched themselves into me, even at such a tender age. I did not know it then, but I was already falling in love, not with a person, but with a place, with a region of the world that many years later would call me back and shape the rest of my journey. And perhaps, if the patterns are to be believed, it may yet be the place where the final threads of my story are meant to be woven. During the 2 years in Singapore, one figure became especially important to me, our Amma. Her name was Wani, and looking back, I know her life was one of quiet sacrifice, her domestic household duties and childcare work unending, her position one of service. But to me, as a child, she was nothing short of extraordinary. Wani became my substitute mother. She was there in the ordinary daily routines, sitting beside me while I struggled with homework, playing with me, soothing me when I was sick, and nursing me back to health with gentle patience. She never treated these things as duties. She carried them out with warmth and kindness, as though I were her own. Wani also fed my curiosity. She recognized in me a questioning mind and never dismissed my endless whys. Instead, she answered them with stories full of wonder about her family, their struggles, and the traditions of her culture. Through her, I first began to see the world not only through my own eyes, but through the lives of others. Her positivity and patience were a constant source of joy in my young life, and the bond we shared ran far deeper than the label of servant could ever suggest. When our time in Singapore came to an end and we returned to the UK, saying goodbye to Wani broke my heart. I left behind not only a place I was beginning to love, but a woman who had loved and cared for me as her own. Even now, decades later, I can still feel the ache of that parting. Wani was one of those threads in the web of my life, a thread woven with kindness, patience, and love, woven with a purpose, and she remains unbroken in my memory. Returning to the UK was difficult for the whole family. Her daily hard work and input into the household was greatly missed, but my heart was broken and I missed her badly. For a while it felt like a part of my soul had been removed. But life moves on as it does, and picked up much as it did before, with new friends and a new best friend. Soon everything seemed to be moving along in an ordinary way again. I must have been 13 when the tuberculosis vaccination program reached our school. Each of us was handed a form to take home, requiring parental consent before we could be vaccinated. At that age, I didn't know much about tuberculosis, nor did I care. The school nurse simply told us that it was something we needed. What I didn't know then was that tuberculosis, although declining in the UK, was still a very real and deadly threat, and survival was far from guaranteed. Yet when I showed my mother the form, she refused to sign it. She explained almost dismissively that I didn't need it, since we didn't live in a slum. Despite my reasoning and pleading, the paper remained unsigned. The vaccination team came and went, and I was left unprotected. In time, I accepted the decision and pushed it to the back of my mind, and life carried on as if nothing had happened. However, when I was nearly 18, with A-levels looming ahead, something had changed. I was pale, tired, and constantly short of energy. A persistent cough had become a concern. I didn't notice all this myself, but others did. A chest x-ray followed, and with it the sharp realization that my life was about to change again. I was playing football for the school team when at half-time I was told I was being substituted. My parents were waiting to take me to the doctor. The doctor, without much explanation, informed me that I had tuberculosis and I needed to go to hospital for a while. That was all I was told. No details, no reassurance. From the doctor's surgery, I was taken straight by ambulance to what they called an isolation hospital. It was miles from anywhere, and isolated it definitely was. Just trees and fields everywhere around me. I had been in hospitals before, sometimes visiting and sometimes as a patient, but this one felt different from the moment I arrived, and I was placed in a room completely alone. I don't remember feeling fear, but I do remember the dreadful, pungent smell of the disinfectant, so strong it sometimes burned my nostrils. Worse still was the sharp sting of loneliness in those first few days. Visits were rare, tightly restricted. I don't think I have ever felt so utterly alone as I did in that first week. My mother cried when she left me there, and I cried for days afterwards. No one explained much, and I couldn't understand why I was being kept apart from the world like that, and why this had to happen. At that age, it felt like I was being punished for something I had done, something so serious no one could even speak of it. By the end of the week, it was as if life and hope had abandoned me. I retreated inward, shutting down. Not only was I cut off from the outside world, but I withdrew from myself, pulling back from even the faintest touch of human interaction. But hope had not abandoned me. My life was already being guided, though I couldn't see it then. Then one day, out of that deep and absolute darkness, a light was about to appear. Myra. I was not yet 18, and I was too young to carry words like mortality comfortably. All I knew was that I had tuberculosis, a hole in my lung the size of an orange, they had said. The doctors had spoken of a new drug called streptomycin, and that this was proving successful as a cure. In that there may have been some little hope, but I couldn't see it. The hospital walls continued to press in with a silence that could feel suffocating, and although the doctors and nurses did their jobs with precision, I mostly felt more of a case than a person. Darkness had come, but on Monday of the following week, as if from nowhere, Myra emerged. Myra was different, a student nurse, young with an eagerness that shone through her inexperience. Even now, 50 years on, I still remember her name, and decades later, I could still draw her portrait from memory. She gave me more of her time than she gave anyone else. She lingered at my bedside, asked questions, smiled in a way that for a moment made me forget the sterility of the room. When she was around, the air seemed lighter, and when she wasn't, the loneliness returned. I didn't think of her as extra special at the time. I only knew that I relied on her presence more than I care to admit. She was the light that came from the darkness and brought me back into the world. She was not just another nurse doing her rounds. She became part of the fabric of my days. And when my A-level books were delivered, she sat beside me, patient as I stumbled through my revision, encouraging me and helping me as though she had all the time in the world. When blood was drawn, it was always Myra at my side, her presence steadying me more than a doctor's reassurance ever could. It seemed that she was always the one who brought my meals, but she never just left the tray. She sat with me as I ate, talking, laughing, and entertaining me as though we were old friends rather than nurse and patient. Sometimes she brought small gifts, tokens of kindness that reminded me that I was not forgotten in that sealed-off room. At 18, I thought little beyond my own relief at her presence, but looking back, I see more. She was not only fulfilling her duties as a student nurse, but she became a lifeline. She anchored me to the world beyond those bleak walls, always ensuring I would never sink back into dark places. Perhaps this is why, 50 years later, I can summon her face in my mind as clearly as if she stood before me now. Perhaps this is why her name has never left me. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was placed there for a reason. As the years have passed, I have come to see patterns in my life, and now I look back differently. What if she was placed in my path, along my thread? What if her purpose was more than tending to a patient's chart, but to steady a young man standing on the edge of despair? Perhaps she was one of the first signs that I was being protected, even before I was ready to see it. A thread in the web, woven gently and quietly into my life. A thread so delicate that it could so easily be missed, and at a time when I could so easily have slipped away. The crash. Streptomycin worked its miracle. 6 weeks later, I was free. I even travelled to my first A-level exam by ambulance, my friends' faces lighting up when they saw me. It felt good to be back among them, back among the living and out of the darkness. I never returned to that hospital again, but I never forgot Myra, the young nurse who had carried me through those weeks. She had been more than a nurse. She had been my guide back to life. That summer, I passed both my driving test and my 3 A-levels. Not with distinction, but well enough to satisfy parents and teachers alike. This time, though, it felt different. I carried my results with a quiet pride, knowing how much it had taken to get there. However, truthfully, while others had studied late into the night alone, I had Myra, patient, kind, and steady. In truth, she gave me an advantage I will always be grateful for. The chest x-rays that followed showed a full recovery. Only a faint scar, barely visible, remained on my lung, a small reminder of what I had endured. 2 years later, I was finally declared completely clear of tuberculosis. It was over. After the hospital, I could look forward. I chose Leicester University, far enough from home to find independence, close enough to return if I needed to. That summer, I worked with Kathy, running a children's playgroup in the town centre. It was more of a babysitting service than a schoolroom, but we loved every moment of it. Day after day we laughed, sharing the work, and grew closer. Friendship blossomed into romance, and before long I was certain I was in love. We were bound for different universities, but that didn't trouble us. There would be Christmas, summer, and long letters in between. At this time in my life I felt good, stronger, whole again. Life had opened up before me, bright with promise. The first year of study at university began, the most exciting time of my life. Leicester was a paradise, and at last I was free. New friends, a new beginning, and to make it even better, I was in love. Kathy worked diligently, but for me university was a playground. I drank too much, played too much, but never worried. I'd mastered the balance. Just enough effort to satisfy parents and now lecturers while still living as I pleased. I chose to study psychology, another decision my father never understood. To him I had closed the door on every good career because for him only maths and physics were important. Science, not art, or perish the thought, something more philosophical. Once again I was a failure in his eyes. But I was undaunted. I wanted to care about people because so many had cared about me. I wanted to understand human behavior, to help others through dark times, as I had once been helped. Psychology to me was not a step down. It was a step into meaning. During a short Easter break, I returned home. Kathy couldn't come, but I missed my mum. On the Sunday of the weekend, after another argument with my father, I stormed out and went for a drive to clear my head. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, the wind restless, the rain sweeping across the road. Yet the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the tapping of the rain on the windscreen calmed me. After half an hour, I turned back toward home. I didn't know it then, but 5 minutes before I reached the turn into our housing estate, another car had leaked oil onto the road. By the time I arrived, visibility was poor, and the sheen of oil was invisible in the wet gloom. I was almost home when it happened. As my wheels touched the slick, the car spun. Tires screeched. Control slipped away from me. A strange thing happens in such moments. Time itself seems to slow down, and you see everything as if it were in slow motion. I remember the concrete lamppost coming towards me, then shutting my eyes. The sounds came next. Glass shattering, metal twisting, concrete grinding. Then silence. Moments later, I found myself standing on the other side of the street, staring at the wreckage of what had been my car. I felt no pain. There was no blood and no bruises. I even checked a mirror for cuts. Nothing. In those days, there were no airbags, yet I was unscathed. I had faced death again, and somehow once more, I had walked away. When Kathy called that evening, I told her I was fine, just shaken. She wept. I reassured her that the car could be replaced. Yes, she said through her tears, the car can be replaced, but you can't. My own tears came then, and I promised her in that moment that I would be more careful, never again to frighten her like that. Looking back, I see it clearly. Once again, it was not my time. Tuberculosis had nearly claimed me. Now a crash that should have crushed me left me untouched. Was this luck, fate, coincidence, or maybe the quiet hand of protection? I believe now that my guardian angel was there, just as she had been before. My thread was not yet complete, and she was making sure it did not break. Words that my angel was to speak to me many decades later revealed how she had always been there. First love. University life resumed. I had a new car, a new sense of invincibility, and Kathy and I grew closer still, inseparable during the holidays. The crash faded into the background, a story told but not dwelt upon. Life was brilliant, at least for now. Moving on, I felt I was winning. Life was amazing, love was certain, and the future was mine. but I was soon to be shown that the road I wanted to follow was not an option. My path, it seemed, was already drawn. I didn't study too hard. By now I had mastered the art of doing just enough. That balance gave me the freedom to enjoy and explore the new environment, to meet people, to party, and most of all to live. I wasn't at university only for academic reasons. I was there to grow as a human being. Politics began to matter to me in a new way, especially war. To me, wars felt futile. Young lives squandered for reasons no one could ever justify. I wasn't an activist, but I had strong feelings and spoke them when the moment called. Alongside politics, I found myself drawn to the social sciences, to the study of people, of inequality, and those who lived with disadvantages I could barely imagine. Slowly, my sympathies and my sense of belonging shifted towards them. I felt alive in my exploration of who I was becoming. I read books not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I learned the art of letter writing, both personal and professional, and I even dabbled in art as an aside. My taste in music broadened. It wasn't just pop songs anymore, but finer, more layered forms that demanded attention. Sport was always a part of my daily life. My reputation as a young developing cricketer preceded me. And then there was David. He was a close friend and in my eyes a master of efficiency. He could speed read a book before I had even pulled it from the shelf. He taught me his craft, speed reading and power writing. And, as years before my headmaster had observed, I took to it quickly. These skills became a kind of secret weapon. Essays that once consumed 2 weeks now took me a single day. That gift of time became precious because it gave me space for everything else: friends, sport, politics, and Kathy. Always Kathy. She was devoted, and so was I, though what made it feel so precious was that we weren't together every moment. Absence made it sweeter. The pain of separation quickly softened into the excitement of reunion. We didn't write letters. Instead, we had telephones, not the mobile phones of today, but the kind tethered to the wall by a short cord. They did the job. I had a payphone in my hall of residence, and Kathy, who shared a house with other girls, had one in a booth across the road from her place. Every Monday at 6 o'clock without fail, she would call. I'd wait by the payphone in my hall, and she would cross the street and call from the booth opposite her house. We had made a promise, and it held week after week. Sometimes we had to cut the conversations short because others were waiting, impatient to make their own calls. But no matter what, the ritual itself was more important. It was a pattern, a trust, a promise we never broke. A person's first love is rarely forgotten, and the same could be said of mine. It was the first time I truly understood what it meant to be in love. Of course, I had felt love before, for Wani, who became like a second mother to me, and for Myra, whose kindness and patience lit my darkest days. But this was different. Romantic love had a beat of its own. It made me feel as though I were walking on clouds, that the sun was brighter and the days longer, simply because she was in them. Even the ordinary became something special when we were together. But love, I came to learn, was not always a smooth and endless summer. The first year was full of discovery, laughter, and the sense of being inseparable. Yet as time went on, small cracks began to show. During the summer, at the end of our first year, I tried to teach Kathy the skills David had given me: speed reading and power writing. To me, it was clever efficiency, a way to hold study and freedom together. To her, it looked like laziness. She believed in steady, disciplined effort, while I valued shortcuts that bought me more of life. For the first time, a shadow passed between us. Weeks went by under that cloud of misunderstanding. She worked diligently, I sought efficiency. She valued discipline, I valued freedom. And yet, even in that tension we were learning that love was not only about the joy of similarities, but also the grace of differences. That being together meant to bend, to accept, and to grow. By the end of that summer, the cloud had lifted. We were still inseparable, still certain of the path ahead. But something had changed. We had tasted reality. Love was no longer just a dream we floated in. It was becoming something real, something tested, something alive. That was the first difficult lesson. Love begins in the raw rush of falling, but it settles into the quieter rhythm of staying. The flowers, the secret meetings, the rose gardens, those fade. What remains is the deeper truth, the need to protect, the feeling of belonging, and the hidden fear whispered at the back of the mind. What if she left? What if it all broke down? They were only shadows then, but even shadows are part of love. And at that moment in time, although life still felt perfect, sometimes it felt too perfect. As in life, best friends come and go, and it was during my second year of so-called study that I met Mark. Mark was everything I wasn't, tall where I was slight, broad shoulders against my diminutive form. A product of the Northeast, he was earthy, quick-witted, and sharper than most gave him credit for. Like me, he had perfected the art of doing just enough to get by. We found ourselves renting the top floor of an old building perched on a hill beside the university campus. The place was ancient, rumoured to be haunted. We never saw a ghost, but the strange groans and rattles in the night, more likely the old plumbing, kept the legends alive. Every spare corner we converted into storage. Crates upon crates of home-brewed beer filled the cupboards, stacked in the dark like treasure. It was cheap to make, vile to taste, but for us, impoverished students, it was the promised land. Cupboards became breweries, corridors turned into fermentation rooms where yeast worked its unseen magic. Before long, we had a conveyor belt of cloudy bottles, each more questionable than the last, but in our eyes, it was heaven on earth. Sport took up a huge part of my time. I earned my cricket coaching badges and continued to develop and grow in that sphere of life. But mostly I just hung out with Mark, worked a part-time job, and maintained the balance between work and play. When I worked hard. When I played even harder. Life was perfect. Made even more perfect because I still had Kathy. There could have been other girls. University life, especially in the haze of drunken nights, always came with temptations. But I resisted. I told myself, if you have the best, forget the rest. And I did. I remained loyal no matter how many opportunities appeared. Even so, in the rare quiet moments of reflection, I sometimes wondered if there was a problem. The thought never lingered long. I brushed it aside with a comfort that Christmas would come, then Easter, and finally the long summer, when we could work and play together just as we had before. She wasn't in my every thought anymore, but she remained a presence in my mind, a steady vision of the future beyond these years of chaos and study. One thing never changed. I never missed Monday evening at 6 o'clock. Not once, not ever. Time slipped by quickly, exams came and went, and soon another summer was upon us. As the days drew nearer, I began to appreciate Kathy more deeply. Amid all the noise and distractions, she was still the rock on which I leaned. That summer, Kathy had changed. Not in a bad way, but something in her had shifted. She was more intense and more openly romantic than ever before. It was as if she had been holding back, and now she was ready to release everything, every thought, every feeling, every hidden emotion. We were the happiest we had ever been. Her new intensity drew something out of me too, pulling old shadows into the light. We talked and loved like never before. as though the world itself was urging us forward. It was building so quickly towards something more. A week before university was calling again, with fear rising inside me, I proposed. I didn't plan it. I didn't prepare a speech or a moment. I just did it. I had no money for a proper ring, so I used an old brass band I found in a toolbox, promising that one day I would replace it. When I asked, she fell into my arms as if the answer had been waiting on her lips all along. It felt almost as though she were saying, "What took you so long?" She didn't care about the ring. She didn't care if it was ever replaced. Kathy had never valued material things. What mattered was the promise itself. We were to be married. Thursday came, the day before we would part ways again for the new academic year, and yet I sensed a shadow, something unsettled beneath the joy. That evening we talked long into the night. We talked about not going back at all, about eloping, about running away and getting married without waiting another year. We knew our parents would be livid, especially Kathy's. But we wrestled with the questions. Would it really matter if we didn't finish university? Would our parents' disappointment be a price worth paying? Or was it more important to endure just one more year apart so that others around us could feel proud, could feel at peace? In the end, common sense prevailed. We agreed it was important to finish what we had started. One more year, that was all. We could survive it. And so on the last Friday of the summer we parted. As our hands slipped apart, she smiled and said the words that I needed to hear. "I'll phone you on Monday." Chapter 2. Fractures. The rain sheeted down in relentless waves as I drove into the darkness that night. My headlights barely cut through the curtain of water, the road ahead a blurred ribbon of black. Luckily, traffic was light, but my old car groaned as I pushed it as fast as it could go. I cursed the British weather. Why is it always like this when you're in a hurry, I thought, frustration rising with every mile. It was a 200-mile journey, yet it felt endless. My eyes stung from the strain, my body heavy with fatigue. My heart pounded as though it might burst. The rain seemed to sap what little strength I had left. Over and over, I muttered to myself, "I'll make it. I'll make it." On arrival, I left the car door swinging open in the rain. No time to lock it, no time to think. I didn't know where to go. There were no mobile phones then, no quick messages for directions, just strangers and the hope that someone might point me in the right direction. The car park was near empty, but at last a passerby showed me where to go. I burst into the building, dripping water over the polished floor. Still no idea where to go. I hurried down corridors, knocking into trolleys, weaving past staff, moving faster than I'd ever moved before. Then an open doorway, a wide room. Out of the corner of my eye, a figure forced me to stop in my tracks, as if someone had pulled the handbrake. I turned, heart hammering. She looked like Kathy, only older. I stepped inside, my whole body trembling. She lifted her eyes to mine, and without a word, slowly shook her head. My legs buckled, my voice cracked into a single word as I fell to my knees. No. In that instant, a thread I thought that would hold forever snapped. The web trembled, and I was left broken in its silence.